In the year 2013, across Eastern Europe, a series of events unfolded that would leave governments, banks, and law enforcement agencies stunned. They were not wars, nor protests, nor political revolutions. They were crimes, calculated, audacious, and executed with such precision that they shook the very foundations of financial security. Armored vans that had been considered impregnable were torn open. Central bank vaults, symbols of national stability, were breached. Millions in cash disappeared into the night, and in their place the region was left with questions, mysteries, and scars that linger even now. To understand what happened in that extraordinary year, we must first understand the environment in which these crimes were born. Eastern Europe in the early 2000s was a region in flux. The fall of communism 2 decades earlier had left behind fractured economies and fragile institutions. Nations that once operated under rigid, centralized systems were suddenly thrust into the chaotic world of free markets, privatization, and global capitalism. Wealth emerged quickly for some, but for many, poverty deepened. Where oversight was weak, corruption thrived. In this unstable environment, organized crime groups found fertile ground. They were not new to the region. Many had their roots in the turbulent 1990s when wars, sanctions, and black markets had created a generation of men skilled in violence, logistics, and secrecy. Veterans of conflict returned home with knowledge of explosives, firearms, and tactical planning. These skills, once used in battlefields, were soon redirected toward another target: money. By 2013, many of these groups had evolved into sophisticated networks. They were no longer petty criminals, but syndicates capable of transnational operations. They had connections to corrupt officials, money laundering channels across borders, and the patience to plan heists for months, even years. It was in this crucible of transition, where wealth and weakness lived side by side, that the great wave of robberies took shape. The highways become battlefields. The first wave of heists struck not in banks but on the roads. Cash and transit operations were the arteries of the region's financial system. Armored vans carried millions in local currency and euros between branches, couriers, and central banks. These vans were heavily reinforced, staffed by armed guards, and operated on strict schedules. On paper, they were secure. But the syndicates saw them differently. One notorious gang, later nicknamed the Black Ravens, specialized in road ambushes. Their operations were executed with chilling precision, almost military in style. In one case, a convoy transporting more than 5 million euros was traveling through a secluded mountain pass. Unknown to the guards, explosives had already been planted at key points on the road. When the convoy entered the chokehold, the charges detonated, disabling the lead and rear escort vehicles. Trapped in the middle, the cash van had nowhere to go. Within moments, masked men emerged from the darkness, armed with assault rifles and explosives. The guards, outnumbered and outgunned, had little chance. The attackers moved with discipline, covering each other, giving commands with hand signals, and stripping the van of its cargo in minutes. By the time police arrived, the gang had vanished into the forest, leaving only wreckage and fear behind. Such attacks were not isolated. They spread like wildfire across the region. Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, Serbia. Highways that had once carried trade now carried risk. Courier companies began altering routes, changing schedules, and traveling in convoys. But no matter the precautions, the criminals seemed to stay one step ahead. The sheer audacity of these ambushes struck terror into those tasked with guarding the money. Guards spoke of the constant fear, the knowledge that at any turn the road ahead could erupt in flames. For many, it was not just a job, but a daily gamble with their lives. If the highway ambushes were terrifying, the breaches of central bank vaults were nothing short of shocking. Banks were designed as bastions of security. Their vaults were built with concrete and steel thick enough to withstand bombardments. They were equipped with motion detectors, alarms, armed guards, and time locks. To the public, these vaults were impenetrable. Yet in 2013, several of them were penetrated. One of the most audacious methods was tunneling. In Bucharest, criminals rented a property adjacent to a central bank branch. To neighbors, they appeared as ordinary tradesmen, hauling in lumber, pipes, and bags of cement. But beneath the surface, they were digging. Every night, under the cover of darkness, they descended into their secret project, a tunnel stretching nearly 80 meters toward the vault. This was not a crude hole. It was an underground passage reinforced with timber, strung with electric lights, and ventilated with fans. Investigators later marveled that the construction was so solid it could have lasted years. The work continued for months, unnoticed by the city above. And then, one night, the tunnel reached its destination. The breakthrough was silent. No alarms, no alerts. The criminals slipped into the vault like phantoms, carrying with them bags and containers. They passed stacks of cash hand to hand, retreating back into the tunnel. By the time the bank opened the next morning, millions were gone. The vault, once a symbol of impregnable security, had been defeated not by force but by patience and ingenuity. Other vaults fell to more violent methods. Explosives, once tools of war, were repurposed as surgical instruments of crime. Shaped charges were placed with precision on vault doors, targeting lock mechanisms rather than destroying the structure. The result was devastatingly effective. Instead of blowing doors off hinges, the charges quietly disabled security features, allowing criminals to enter in minutes. In some cases, these operations lasted no more than 90 seconds. 90 seconds to undo years of engineering, to render a fortress vulnerable, to take millions and vanish into the night. No matter how skilled the tunneling, how precise the explosives, or how disciplined the ambush, none of these operations could have succeeded without information. And information came from within. Insiders were the true linchpin of the 2013 heists. Bank clerks, security officers, even police officials were drawn into the web of corruption. Some were seduced by wealth, offered more money than they could dream of earning honestly. Others were coerced, threatened with harm to themselves or their families if they refused to cooperate. One insider revealed the rotation of vault codes, which changed daily. Another provided blueprints of alarm systems and patrol schedules. Yet another turned off cameras at crucial moments. These betrayals transformed what would have been risky gambles into near certainties. Investigators later described the insiders as the weakest link in the chain. No matter how thick the concrete, no matter how advanced the security system, one human weakness could bring it all crashing down. For the criminals, recruiting insiders was often easier than acquiring explosives or digging tunnels. In societies where salaries were low and corruption was widespread, temptation was everywhere. The scale of the heist was staggering. 6 million stolen in Sofia, 9 million gone in Moldova. Audacious raids in Bucharest, Belgrade, and beyond. The region bled money and the public watched in disbelief. These were not isolated gangs, they were networks. Syndicates stretching across borders, connected by shared intelligence, resources, and personnel. Some were linked to the infamous Pink Panthers, a group already notorious for jewel thefts. Others were local factions that had grown into international players. They operated like military organizations with clear hierarchies, logistics teams, and financial channels for laundering money. To police, it appeared less like crime and more like a campaign, a coordinated assault on the financial arteries of Eastern Europe. The response of law enforcement governments could not remain passive. Europol and national agencies launched major investigations. Task forces were assembled. Intelligence was shared across borders, and dawn raids became a common sight. Police stormed luxury apartments, breaking through doors to find suspects surrounded by piles of cash, gold, and expensive cars. Farms were searched where hidden bunkers revealed millions buried underground. In one case, police found cash submerged in sealed containers within a septic tank. These discoveries reassured the public. News cameras captured police commissioners standing before mountains of recovered money, announcing arrest with pride. In one case, authorities reported recovering 70% of stolen funds, a rare victory in a war of shadows. But for every success, there were failures. Many arrests targeted the lower ranks, the drivers, the lookouts, the muscle. The masterminds, the architects of the operations, remained elusive. They vanished into the labyrinth of international finance, their fortunes hidden in offshore accounts, shell companies, and cryptocurrency exchanges that were then in their infancy. The true architects of the 2013 heist became phantoms. Their names appeared on wanted lists, their faces on Interpol posters, but they were never caught. Some fled to countries with no extradition treaties, living in luxury villas in Montenegro or Dubai. Others simply disappeared, their identities erased, their wealth quietly invested into legitimate businesses. Detectives followed trails that went cold within weeks, bank transfers that ended in offshore havens, properties registered under false names, investments made through fronts impossible to trace. For the men in charge of these heists, disappearance was the ultimate skill. Meanwhile, those left behind filled the courtrooms. Trials became media spectacles, with insiders testifying against former allies. Details emerged. Conversations in smoky bars, envelopes of cash slid across tables, whispered promises of safety for families. These trials painted a vivid picture of sprawling networks, but they could never reach the top. The masterminds had vanished into the shadows, and the shadows do not testify. The aftermath of 2013 went beyond financial loss. It was psychological. Citizens who had once trusted banks now questioned whether their savings were truly safe. Employees of courier companies lived in fear of becoming the next targets. Even boardrooms whispered about vulnerabilities that could not be spoken aloud. Governments responded with reforms. Banks invested heavily in new technologies: biometric vault access, GPS-tracked convoys, advanced surveillance. Guards were retrained, and new laws imposed harsher penalties for insider corruption. Yet no technology could erase the scar left on public confidence. In the streets and in the press, the heists became folklore. Stories circulated of the criminals as almost mythic figures, part villain, part genius. Some admired their audacity, others feared their brutality. Either way, they had become legends of the underworld. Years later, many questions remain unanswered. How much was truly stolen? How many insiders were never caught? Were all the heists connected, or were some simply copycats? And above all, where are the masterminds now? Detectives still revisit case files. Some sit at desks littered with photographs, maps, and notes, staring at question marks that have no answers. Others admit quietly that the money is gone forever, and that the men who took it may never face justice. The legacy of 2013 is not only in the millions that vanished, but in the doubts that remain. Doubts about security, about trust, about the strength of institutions we take for granted. The Eastern European heists of 2013 were more than robberies. They were a statement, a demonstration that with patience, planning, and corruption, even the strongest systems can be undone. They revealed the fragility beneath the steel and concrete, the human weakness that no technology can eliminate. For every vault that was breached, for every convoy that was ambushed, a larger truth was revealed. Security is never absolute. The shadows are always watching, always waiting, always ready to strike again. And as investigators admit, the shadows tell no tales.